I am going to be talking to Brendan James and also Noah Kulwin right now on 9/11. Blowback Season 4 is out and about. I'll show you guys the official trailer first.
I was there when the first dreams came off the assembly line. I was there when they began welding the things into their armor, bolting on the wheels. Pouring in the jelly. I was there when they turned the juice on. And I was there when the things began to twitch.
Thank you, Squeezy, for the 10 gifted subs. Wait, where are you? Are you here? Season arrives on August 25th. All right, let's do it. Let's have a convo. Thank you so much for coming on, guys. I'm very excited for the new season of Blowback, especially because it is going to feature one of my favorite subjects, once again, 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love a little light stroll through that memory?
Let's talk about it. What's happening? You guys already know Noah. Noah's been on many times. Noah's a OG. As far as the stream goes, we used to play Fortnite many years ago when I was streaming off of my PlayStation. And also Brendan James, Deep Beige on Deep_Beige on Twitter. You guys just watched the trailer of the Blowback Season 4. Blowback Pod Season 4. That animation goes hard, by the way. Holy shit.
Thank you so much. And let me shout out before I forget, Ben Clarkson did the animation. He's a wonderful artist, and we knew he had done some videos for, I think Chapo is where I had seen him do some animation, and we said we gotta get in touch with this guy to kind of kick it up a notch for season 4 with the teasers, and I just could not have been more amazed at how he took this little idea we had and made it so amazing. So that's really the hype we're seeing today is all due to Ben. So Ben Clarkson, go look him up.
So let's talk about it. What are you guys talking about this time around? What's happening?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, this season, it's almost sort of like been lurking ever since we started the show. I think in most people's minds, the most iconic or even on the nose idea of Blowback, which, you know, that's a punchy title for our show, but we often find sometimes it's Blowback, sometimes it's not. We thought we have to finally confront this example of the straight line you can draw from the anti-Soviet jihad that America carried out in the 80s with the Saudis and the Pakistanis and Israel and the UK. The straight line you can draw from that to 9/11 itself and a lot of other things. It's really not just about 9/11. That's one event that, of course, is an inflection point. But then we look all over the world at how that policy, that sort of peanut butter and chocolate of American capitalism and Islamic fundamentalism, although they're often said to be, you know, sworn enemies, are actually working closer together in history than a lot of people think. And we wanted to look at that. And the Afghanistan operation is kind of like, you know, Exhibit A. So we thought, let's follow the cookie crumbs from the 80s up until 9/11 and beyond, because we just had the withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years just a couple years ago. So that made sense for us for season 4.
The biggest L for Joe Brandon in his career, where his approval rating seemingly never recovered when the media decided fuck this guy, which, by the way, was the right thing to do. It was the one courageous choice that he made in his administration's history, ironically enough, which he got subsequently punished for endlessly. But this is a subject that's near and dear to me. it's kind of ironic that we're talking about it on 8/22 because in 2019, I've described this before. I don't know if you know this, Brandon, or not, but in the year 2019, on August 20th, I said some things. I had some choice words about Dan Crenshaw when he was having a conversation with Joseph Rogan on their podcast. I said some choice words about him, specifically relating back to Brave Mujahideen, a play on words there, a double entendre on Ronald Reagan considering the Mujahideen to be brave, something that is falsely attributed to the end of Rambo 3. This movie is dedicated to the Brave Mujahideen, which I think is not even real, but whatever. Correct. It's like a very common meme. Also, on top of that, I said something along the lines of America deserving 9/11, which was this very concept that you guys are tackling. It was something that, something that I firmly believe as far as blowback because of our actions all the way from the Afghan Civil War all the way until now. And our guys, the people that we had trained, given weapons to, and supported coming back and turning the crosshairs on the United States of America. Some of the choice things I suspect you'll be looking at is, was it University of Nebraska and the Wahhabist texts, like the extremism or the textbooks that they gave to children in Pakistan and Afghanistan that taught math on, what was it like? It was like anti-USSR.
Yeah, it was like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, if you kill X many infidels, how many infidels do you have left? And we were printing that stuff. You're right. I believe from the University of Nebraska during the 80s and shipping them off to Afghanistan to really shape a jihadist culture that we were very much in favor of. And in fact, the Taliban made use of those same textbooks when they came to power, which we also approved of because our ally Pakistan, of course, more or less created the Taliban out of the kind of social decay that was the next generation of Afghanistan following the war in the 80s. And the Taliban, the only thing they changed is they kind of scratched out faces and depictions of women. But otherwise, they were perfectly happy with the books that the U.S. sent over because of all the ideological conformity there was that we seemed to somehow support. So yeah, that's in there. I mean, it's almost like, where do you begin? But I think that if people are new to the show or want a clear idea of what we're doing this season, it's like almost split into two. It's like the first half of the season is the 80s and that entire covert operation, the biggest covert operation America's ever carried out, or at least up until that point, of a proxy war. And then the second half is, what happens after that? Where do these veterans of the Afghan jihad go? And who do they attack? It's not America right away. In fact, the first warrant in Interpol for bin Laden's arrest was issued not by America, even though he had already attacked us several times or been connected with attacks. It was Gaddafi's Libya. And we scrubbed that from the public version of his arrest warrant because we didn't want to explain that bin Laden's associates had been involved with all kinds of other unsavory stuff that our allies or us might have been okay with or even working with him on. So we follow that kind of trail into 9/11 and the occupation that America took upon itself after 2001. It's kind of like a real saga this season.
Love that.
And we've also got a really crazy set of interviews that get interwoven throughout the story, similar to how we've done it in past seasons, and that are also standalone bonus episodes. But we talked to, I interviewed Cy Hirsch, so we've got some good stuff that'll be in the season, I think. And we've also, Brendan's got a whole score that he composed that's going along with it, and that will be released as a soundtrack in September 25th. That's right.
Yeah, just a month after the release of the show, and people have been sweet enough who listen to the show. They tend to like the soundtrack. We like to make people feel like it's not a lecture, but it's kind of a compelling story, almost like a radio play. And so one thing we hope people get out of our show that they may not find elsewhere is that sense of kind of motion and momentum, and the music is always helpful with that. But also, the bonus episodes, we got 10 more bonus episodes for people who sign up. Noah spoke to Cy Hirsch. We talked to these old school CBS journalists who were always trying to scream bloody murder in the 80s that would go back to America and get told, sorry, we're not running that. And their name is Elizabeth Gould and Paul Fitzgerald. They're amazing. Spoke to Afghanistan's youngest woman MP after 2001, Malalai Joya, who did everything from covertly teaching girls and women during the Taliban regime in the 90s to running and winning office, but then getting exiled all over again because of the warlords that we worked with. She blew the whistle on them. She's a guest. And a lot of great journalists from the region as well. So it's jam-packed, but you got to sign up on Friday or before Friday, if you like, at blowback.show, because we're pretty proud of this season. We think it's probably our best one yet.
Hell yeah. So a lot of people are saying Reagan created 9/11. Reagan is responsible for 9/11 in the chat, and I think that they're a little bit wrong about that. I assume that you guys start the story with Carter rather than Ronald Reagan, because one thing that happened in the 20-year anniversary and the subsequent pullout of Afghanistan was I felt super vindicated about what I had said, because there were so many documentaries that finally came out that actually did tie America's involvement with the Mujahideen, which was an eclectic group of individuals. Not every single one of them were like Islamist fundamentalists. There was certainly infighting within the different sects as well, but overall, some of them did end up becoming the Taliban. And what a lot of people failed to recognize, in my opinion, was that it was before that the Afghan trap, as quoted by Zbigniew Brzezinski. I'm not saying his name right after all these years because it's impossible.
He doesn't deserve it. It's okay.
Yeah, but an interview in the French magazine Le Nouvel Observateur in January 1998, where Brzezinski took credit for turning Afghanistan and the Afghan Civil War into the USSR's trap, like the USSR's very own Vietnam.
Right. And it's actually, it's in that like line. He later tried to say, I didn't say that. And there was actually like an academic article that made the rounds recently that tried to claim that actually, like, you know, maybe there is some confusion of whether or not he said that. Yeah. But like, as other scholars and as you sort of said, like, you know, like recent journalistic works have made clear, and are, you know, the archives made clear, there was an active American effort run out of the NSC specifically in the White House that was conceived of to they conceived of their late 70s onward involvement in Afghanistan as with the goal of kicking up enough shit so as to create a situation where the Soviets would come in. And, you know, while some people have said, like people in the CIA or people, you know, Pakistani ISI people say like, oh, it was never our intention to, like, that wasn't our goal. It's like, well, you know, Brzezinski was a rung above those in those days, like in the Carter years. Like he was the one setting the agenda, and that was what he copped to ultimately. You know, he did actually say that.
Yeah. We look at that in the show because we try to be fair, even to folks like the top of the food chain. You don't want to say something flat out false. He claims it was a mistranslation. He can try to play that down for the rest of his life, because the thing is he can't quite help himself. We have tape, and there are interviews and witnesses to him bragging in his private time about how he sucked the Soviets into Afghanistan. And this guy was a top dog as far as anti-communism. He was Polish. He hated, you know, the Russians' history in Poland. He really thought, not even in terms of the Cold War, honestly, but like in terms of the 19th century kind of great game methodology. And he, after 9/11, got quite embarrassed about that strategy. But
yeah, I was going to say, how do you get mistranslated in the entire interview, where you very clearly detail what you did, and then simultaneously even are asked directly, don't you think Islamic fundamentalism is a problem? And like your
I straight up think that the reason he got away with it was because he was like, listen, it's French standards, you know how they are. Like that, I think part of it, more or less, I think how people perceived it.
I think part of it is literally because it was pre 9/11. America's crosshairs weren't as aggressively turned towards Islamic terror. So they weren't the big bad guys, like the main enemies at that point. So it was more so like I ended the Cold War by, you know, by pulling the USSR into Afghanistan. Look at me. Where one of the best parts in that interview in that French magazine, in my opinion, is when they ask him straight up, I'm trying to find that quote right here. When they ask him straight up, like, don't you think that it's terrifying to beef up these like extremist people? And he goes, what are they going to do? Like something along, I'm paraphrasing. But
I mean, and it's happen?
And to be clear, it was also like, he should have known better as he was saying it, that like those words would come back to bite him in the ass, because they were already doing stuff. Like they were
Yeah.
showing up in the Balkans, they were showing up in the Philippines. Like Al Qaeda, what we call Al Qaeda in the wake of September 11th, more or less, but like these, the quote unquote Afghan Arabs, as they were called at the time, these Islamist warriors who went to Afghanistan, and we talk about this obviously in detail on the show, they had kicked up a tremendous amount of shit in a whole lot of places where they weren't supposed to have, by the supposedly by the designs of the CIA, by Brzezinski and others.
Wait, one second.
When they
Sorry. Oh, God damn it. My Discord is messing up.
But yeah, Brzezinski is a character. We have some of the most colorful characters we've ever had on the show this season. I mean, he's a really cold, mercurial, like Machiavellian guy. Then you've got Charlie Wilson, the Texas congressman who was really became the spokesperson for the Mujahideen. He was a womanizer. He was a cokehead. He got thrown in jail, almost thrown in jail so many times over cocaine. Did a hit and run, and the night he did the hit and run, and almost got picked up by the DC police, or maybe it was Virginia. It was a jurisdictional issue. He literally got on a plane to Pakistan to get out of there, and went to Pakistan, hung out with the Mujahideen, and by the time he got back, it was all kind of quashed. He's an amazing character. The Afghan warlords themselves, or the Mujahideen who become the warlords, you got guys who were ex-communists, you got guys who were like hardcore acid in the faces of girls, way before Al-Qaeda was even on the scene. And then you've got kind of our favorites in the West who, we did a lot of PR for, who were in fact pretty noxious characters behind the scenes. And then of course, you've got the old reliable Bush family and their Bin Laden opposite numbers. We try to talk about that. We try to talk about how the relationship between Saudi Arabia and America was really personified by the Bush family and the Bin Laden family, and of course others. And that conditions everything from 9/11 onward and before 9/11. So it's definitely like a rogues gallery this season as well. It was really fun to kind of paint these portraits.
Not to spoil anything too much, but I was wondering, given the lab stuff that's going on in the intro, I immediately thought of anthrax.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, because like post 9/11, I think the anthrax mail bombings played a fairly significant role in like really drumming up this fear that like 9/11 could come to your hometown, even if your fucking hometown has like 10 people in it. I was wondering if there's any talk about the anthrax in the show.
We mentioned it in passing as kind of color, because you kind of have to kill your darlings with this stuff. We have only 10 episodes to like tackle this whole web of stuff. We mentioned it back in season 1, I think, Noah, didn't we, with like the episode with Will? Because the anthrax stuff, to the best of my memory, was like linked back to government employees, right? Or like crank government guys.
Who are all dead now, by the way.
Interesting.
They did.
So yeah,
Dr. Bruce Ivans, look it up.
Yeah, Bruce Ivans, right. So we don't like laser focus on that in the season, but it is the background to the increasing momentum of people were really more freaked out about anthrax in a way than they were about 9/11 itself, because 9/11 happened in as Ted Cruz would say, the kind of liberal cosmopolitan New York. But you could get hit anywhere, as you said, Hasan. You could get hit anywhere by anthrax.
Yeah,
theoretically.
Yeah, it was really odd. What happened with not that you guys, I guess you guys didn't cover it too much, but what happened in that, the facility, if I recall, because anthrax, one of those things about anthrax is that, you can really trace it depending on what like strain it is, I guess, where you can really figure out, like, for example, if it's one of those like research labs that, for example, the FBI takes advantage of or utilizes. It would have been a real shame if they if something happened to that facility, that lab. Go on. Sorry.
No. Like you said, I mean, we're not as fully well read on that for season 4 as we could be, but it was definitely basically stamped out as a public conversation after 2001. And then little tricklings have happened since. I think there was a report that was published like a decade later. But you very well may be more on the cutting edge of what's been reported on since then than at least I am right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that was crazy to me was the media scare. Like, that's the thing that, like, is, we just may never know, like, ultimately beyond the, like, hey, the anthrax came from an American lab. Isn't that sus? But, like, what I can definitely point to with tons of evidence is, basically from when it first starts showing up in, I think it's still September '01, but, like, from there through December, all the stories, like, that's what we went over with Will Menaker in season 1. But it was nuts. I mean, it was, I don't think you have to call it like a psyop or anything, because it's like, it was a great illustration of like the natural mechanics of how they glom onto, a story like that, for the exact reason you said, which is that like it can reach, like everybody from, Kansas to Arizona.
Yeah.
Also, Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban during 2001, ironically enough, he slept with a gas mask in the months leading up to and during the American bombing because he was worried that the Americans would use anthrax on him. He was apparently very, very keyed into the anthrax scare himself. So it was a sort of a poetry there.
It's interesting because like the scientist, committing suicide and all that. But hey, look, we don't have to talk about all that. Anyway, okay, so going back to it, so you said there's a lot of colorful characters. Charlie Wilson's awesome.
Yep.
One of my favorites, I think. Charlie Wilson's War, as far as that story is told in the movie. Have you guys seen Charlie Wilson's War?
Yeah.
A while ago, yeah.
What would you? Yeah. How much of that was, in your opinion, massaged to fit the narrative that he was a brave person who was like defending American interests versus what he was actually doing?
Well, the book is pretty good that it's based on. It's by a journalist named George Cryle, who was effectively the biographer of Wilson, and Gus Abrakotos, who's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman in the movie. He's the CIA manager of the Jihad. And I would never say anything against Philip Seymour Hoffman, period, and especially his performance in that movie is great.
Oh, incredible.
But I would say I haven't seen the movie in a while. Even the book does, to use your word, massage things toward this idea that as goofy or as buffoonish or as even morally and ethically compromised as Wilson and maybe the whole operation was, the Soviets were doing chemical warfare. They were, trying to get to the Persian Gulf and take over the world. I wouldn't put all those words in Cryle's mouth, but I think in the film it's like kind of set up that inherently this guy's the protagonist. And in a screenplay, you got to make your protagonist most of the time in a conventional Hollywood movie, however sleazy he is or however flawed, he's got to be up against something worse. And I think the movie does take on a bunch of disproven, which we get to in the show, disproven projections of war crimes that America was doing in Vietnam a couple years earlier onto the Soviet Union. And there were a lot of movies.
It's a classic.
Yeah, it's classic. In the 80s, Red Scorpion, Rambo 3, obviously, The Beast, and to a degree Red Dawn, although I have a soft spot for Red Dawn. These movies all kind of projected stuff, including chemical warfare, which we discussed on the show, was kind of a pre-Iraq version of cooking up a whole campaign about WMD that never amounted to anything. And so the Wilson's War movie is only worth watching, in my opinion, for Philip Seymour Hoffman. The book can be very valuable because he really does paint a picture of the world that Charlie Wilson existed in. But the one thing I will say is that Mike Nichols wanted to end the movie with the planes hitting the towers. And
really?
And the producers or somebody up above his head said, that's not going to fly. This comes out in Christmas or whatever, like, or whatever their ideological reasons. And I'll give Nichols credit. He said some stuff that was also kind of propaganda about this exaggerated Soviet portrait or caricature, but he was trying to definitely link it to the 2000s, and I guess the studios put the kibosh on it.
The other thing I would say, the other crazy departure from a character is the Julia Roberts lady in real life was like a psycho right winger, and in the movie she's like she's Julia Roberts. In real life, I think she was more
Paula Deen.
What'd you say?
I said she was like Paula Deen. She was like Zsa Zsa Gabor. She was like all these glamorous ladies, but she would have parties at her place where like the heads of state from Jordan and Saudi Arabia and others would get together, the Safari Club. As they were called. They were a big part of the head honchos against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And she would have people dress up as Romans, as like themed parties, and have black kids walk around as slaves, which is like an anachronistic ahistorical understanding of what Roman slavery obviously even was. She was probably thinking about something a little closer to home. And serve people drinks and like refill their goblets. Like it was like a Paula Deen sicko racist party circuit. And that is the party circuit.
So Charlie Wilson actually fucked her though, right? Like that's real?
Oh yeah, they had an affair. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a bizarre social scene, and we get it that there's a funny story. I don't think it's spoiling anything. There's a funny story where her name was Joanne Herring, and she and Charlie Wilson were really big fans of Pakistan's military dictator, who was also an Islamist, named General Zia. And General Zia had the go-ahead on any weapons that we wanted to send to Afghanistan, because obviously Pakistan is right across the border, and Pakistan has always used Islamic militants in its foreign policy as a way to manage things in Afghanistan and to ultimately get the edge over on India. Now, back during these parties where Wilson and Herring were trying to raise money for the Mujahideen, they hosted General Zia. The only problem is in respectable society, General Zia executed the president that came before him in a military coup. And that's sometimes looked at as a faux pas. And he got to this party, and probably a lot of these bimbo gentlemen and ladies at the party didn't even know about any of that. But Joan Herring got up and like banged her champagne glass and said, "Before I introduce our guest, General Zia, I just want to make it clear, he did not murder the previous president of Pakistan. And I really wish we could all just get that over with. Let's just get that out of the way." And everyone in the audience was like mortified and suddenly wondering maybe what was going on here at these fundraisers.
Yeah. I mean, that's a classic, leader in MENA region that kills former leadership is ripe for American allegiances. So at the heart of the matter, what you're basically telling me is that we are the ones who funded, facilitated, gave infrastructural, logistical support to these fundamentalist groups that we turned into massive powers in the region that we were utilizing to our benefit until it ultimately created an unstable environment where they actually did assume control over Afghanistan twice now. I would say in both circumstances it was our doing, and then we just kind of cast them aside because that's what happened in the aftermath of America pulling out of Afghanistan as well. One thing that I guess I want to talk about with respect to the Afghan pullout is that Donald Trump lucked out dramatically. I want to hear what your guys' opinion is on this, where, like, do you think Trump would have actually pulled out of Afghanistan? Because I feel like he had the opportunity to do so in his first term, and he never really followed through on it, even though he did negotiate the terms of leaving.
Yeah, he was the one who basically set the table for Biden.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did negotiate the terms, and to be fair to him, that was something that Obama had refused to put himself out there to do. According to HasanAbi, he's a professor at the National Defense University. So technically he works for the DOD, and he told us that during the 90s, we were letting in all kinds of Al-Qaeda guys intentionally. So, he was a very good and knowledgeable guy that we speak to on the show. He wrote a book recently called The Return of the Taliban, basically trying to cover everything that's happened since 2021. And he covers those negotiations. And apparently Trump gave everyone a 8 to 9 month deadline and was literally saying, almost like as a parody of himself, in the halls of the White House, "Where's my deal? I want my deal. Where's my deal with the Taliban?" And he got it. He did achieve that. He wanted to apparently pull out the troops before 2020 so he could use it as an election talking point. Maybe it's good for him that he didn't end up having the time to do that.
And he lost, yeah.
So lost now anyway.
So now he has the perfect talking point to be like, I would have pulled out perfectly. Whereas I mean, in a different timeline, I guess we would have seen Rachel Maddow get extra crazy. You know what I mean? As far as like criticizing pulling out of Afghanistan, because I feel like liberal media would have ate Donald Trump up even further.
Well, you know what? Funny thing you mentioned Rachel Maddow. I don't take the time to put this into the show because ultimately she's kind of irrelevant now anyway. But there was that huge story that I remember seeing her really take the lead on about how Russia was paying bounties for American soldiers a couple years ago. And that ended up being nonsense. But funnily enough, that is, again, talk about projection. We literally did that in the 1980s. Gustav Rakotos, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman in that film, they used belt buckles as proof of, an American kill. And we obviously paid the Mujahideen who killed and, by the way, used sexual violence as a weapon of war in a way that maybe the Contras in Nicaragua is the only other modern example of using it that brutally. These guys were like the Contras, the guys we were backing. You're right to point out that there was a broader resistance to the Soviet invasion, which the Soviets knew, and they were actually quite reluctant to do this in the first place.
Yeah.
But the ones we bought and the guys that we liked the most and the guys that we gave billions to collectively, and in the case of one really bad guy, $1 billion straight out, went straight to him. They were the mafia bosses. They were not the moderates or the middle of the roads. We made sure that it was not a liberal nationalist opposition. And so just on that bounty hunter thing, we were literally paying guys to, as the CIA put it, cornhole Russian prisoners and then kill them and use their belt buckles or maybe even literally their scalps as proof. Something that Russia actually did not end up doing when Rachel Maddow was crying bloody murder a couple years ago.
We famously cover this on this broadcast, at least, on one of the latest Call of Duties, where the Highway of Death, a war crime that the former Bush administration engaged in, attributed that specific act of war crimes to Russia in one of the latest Call of Duty games, where they were like, who could do such an awful thing? And they were like, of course it would be Russia. Who would ever bomb an entire highway full of retreating soldiers that had given up and also their family members? Who would do such a thing? And
also, like we just said, I mean, as far as projection, the Vietnam War happened only 5 years before we booted up the Mujahideen. Actually, we talk about it in the show, the Vietnam War was still in progress when we actually first made contact with a lot of these Mujahideen. Zbigniew Brzezinski kicked it up a notch to make it like a real machine, but we were already working with Pakistan in a lot of ways, something that was well known.
And besides, if the Vietnam War was ending and the Golden Triangle was coming to an end, there would have to be a new place to grow all the world's illegal heroin.
Well, that is interesting, isn't it? Is that we had the Golden Triangle throughout our wars in Southeast Asia. We wind that down in like 75. And then, wouldn't you know it, 5 years later, Afghanistan is on its way to becoming the heroin capital of the world. And still is.
But not for America, though. That European heroin, right?
It's the European market.
Yeah,
but it's
interesting.
But it still produces 90% of the world's heroin in general. Because
America is like fentanyl, which is more cheaply made and comes in from Mexico and China or wherever, is the thing here.
Yeah. I always found that to be interesting that somehow our heroin comes from somewhere else, our fentanyl comes from somewhere else, whereas the entire market for the rest of the world, all the heroin is being produced in Afghanistan. I guess as far as JSOC operations goes, they have a line that they don't cross, which is don't send that heroin. Don't send that good Afghanistan heroin to the United States of America. Send it elsewhere.
Well, it would certainly complicate because a lot of Western officials got rich off of enabling the heroin trade, obviously. We talk about in the latter half of the season about the major centers of production of heroin in Afghanistan were under U.S. control. And the major heroin dealers in Afghanistan were our friends in the government and what was formerly the Northern Alliance, the anti-Taliban alliance. It's not to say anything nice about the Taliban, but sheer mathematics make it so that they could not have been producing the majority of the heroin. And that just means that a lot of people were enabling that. And if you want to pull that off, you probably want to minimize as much as possible where the product ends up being connected to the occupation that your country is carrying out.
There's another important player here is Pakistan in terms of also what the drug trade is capable of there. Because the Iranian border, Iran has a huge heroin problem, a huge addiction problem, and Pakistan does as well. And both of their governments do a very good job of keeping lids on it, or at least trying to. To the extent that Pakistan is, particularly now that there is no American occupation and the Taliban is trying, it appears, and the reports that we have now, the limited information that we have from the UN and other authorities suggest that they are, in fact, reducing. Yeah, you've clearly discussed you've played the hits here.
The Taliban's successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world, according to the United States Institute of Peace. The ban is not a counter-narcotics victory and will have negative economic and humanitarian consequences, potentially leading to a refugee crisis.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Well, I'm sure you've covered this many a time, Hasan, but Noah, we were in some interview the other day. It was a good one where both, I thought to put it like the war on terror and the war on drugs, both of them do not target drugs and terror per se. What they are for, if you look at the results, is to control market share of those things. And we don't go after anyone who deals drugs per se. The guys
we hire them.
We hire them. The guys who further our interests, and I mean, we could talk about all over the world. I'll limit it to Afghanistan so I don't go off book. But like in Afghanistan, it was the guys we worked with because it made money. It was an illicit but very useful revenue stream. We talk about BCCI, which I'm sure you've spoken about before. That was it was really one of the primary, if not the primary, illicit revenue streams toward the Mujahideen and the Contras. But we don't go after anyone who deals drugs. We go after our enemies who deal drugs. And with the war on terror, we didn't arrest anyone who did terror or go after anyone who did terror, only those who were opposing either the occupation of whatever country we were in or those who were fighting the other terrorists that we like. So, of course, you can see this in Syria, where we worked with the al-Nusra Front and other associated al-Qaeda groups because they were on our team.
And continue to work with, if not the same ones, like, their immediate descendants.
Exactly, because it's not even like it's the Contras where we called them freedom fighters.
It's interesting you say that because, not to toot my own horn again, but of course to toot my own horn again, that is precisely what I was talking about with respect to Dan Crenshaw, who at the time, while he was talking about like, oh, why did 9/11 happen? Oh, it's because they hate us because they ain't us. That was his like sound foreign policy analysis on the subject matter. Simultaneously, he was in Congress vetoing not vetoing, but blocking a bill that Bernie Sanders, I believe, had put forward that would stop arming Al-Qaeda by way of Saudi Arabia, this time in Yemen, of course, where our arms, by way of Saudi Arabia, directly getting into the hands of Al-Qaeda, which he thought was bullshit. And, Bernie Sanders thought it was bullshit, but Dan Crenshaw and numerous others, of course, thought, no, it's fine. We should give Al-Qaeda some weapons. Like, what are you talking about? They need it. They're neurodivergent minors.
We've sort of run with an aesthetic this season, because we're both big fans, of Metal Gear Solid. Obviously, Phantom Pain takes place in Afghanistan.
Brendan, you should just share your screen and pull that up.
What's that?
You should pull those the episode titles up.
Oh yeah, I will in a second. But yeah, so we've run with this Metal Gear theme, and it's funny you mentioned Crenshaw, because if there is to be a real world example, I cannot imagine a shittier eye patch guy than Dan Crenshaw to stand in for Big Boss or Naked Snake. But I guess he's who we have. It's funny that you got in trouble for saying
he's bigger boss.
Yeah, he's puffy boss. He's too big boss. Yeah, I mean. The episode titles, I could probably rattle them off off the top of my head. I think we don't do it for every single one of them, but episode 1 is called Snake Eater. Episode 2 is called Bleeders and Dealers. Episode 3 is The Trap. Episode 4 is They're Yours Now. Episode 5 is called We Can Live With That. And then for the rest of the season, episode 6 is Ground Zeroes. Episode 7 is Guns of the Patriot. Episode 8 is Sons of Liberty. Episode 9 is Peace Walker. That's the Obama episode. And episode 10 is, with the withdrawal, The Phantom Pain. So, and the last thing or not, maybe not the last, but like the one thing I wanted to say about the withdrawal and picking them up and putting them back down, to your point, Hasan, is what I'm interested in seeing, we need to now sit back and watch, is back in the 90s, America was totally fine doing business with the Taliban. We made noises about their treatment of women, etc., but we had a whole pipeline deal lined up that Osama bin Laden screwed up because he was attacking the USS Cole and the embassies in Africa. What I want to see now is whether or not there can be dealings again, maybe even in 20 years, who knows where it could go, between the U.S. and the Taliban, because U.S. officials visited this month and had quote unquote, like normal or whatever, constructive conversations. And the Taliban and Iran are beefing on the western border of Afghanistan over water rights. The Taliban doesn't like Iran. It doesn't like other, Shia groups in the region. And even though we've been fighting a war with them for the past 20 years because of Osama, essentially, it's not out of the question to imagine us finally being able to work with them, even if it's kind of under the table. And I'm curious to see more evidence of that as time goes on.
I wonder if that will lead to.
It's Afghanistan's also really useful for us. If not, even if we don't have bases there anymore, that like region is incredibly it's incredibly important. We touched on this at a few different points, but like it's incredibly important for surveillance purposes deep into Russia and very deep into China. If part of the American strategic interest in this region is not just about countering Russia anymore, but also longer term about countering and thinking about how do we fuck with China.
The thing I just heard from one of our guests who's pretty plugged in is that the TAPI pipeline, which was the dream of Afghanistan, natural gas pipeline going through Afghanistan from Turkmenistan. So the T is Turkmenistan, the A is Afghanistan, and then P and I is India and Pakistan. This project was what we wanted to do in the 90s and what we tried to do throughout the occupation along with those states. But of course, the war made it so chaotic. A pipeline is a really easy thing to attack. It kind of died on the vine for a bit. Apparently, it is revving back up with U.S. support, which means U.S. support for the Taliban. There's also funds that apparently have been reported not going to the Afghan people because as people probably know, we've frozen their assets in banks, but there is money trickling in. One whistleblower in charge of some government watchdog says, I think we are sending money to the Taliban. So I'm really curious about that. And interestingly enough, a pipeline between Iran and Pakistan has been canceled. That's what a boss told me, Noah. He said that the TAPI pipeline is going ahead with U.S. support. Pakistan is canceling the pipeline with Iran, which really pissed Iran off because they poured a bunch of money into it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak too soon, but that's like a pretty clear alignment of U.S., Taliban, Pakistan, and to a degree, India getting the pipeline stuff going again, getting the band back together, and Iran getting cut out.
How does this play into Imran Khan's current situation in Pakistan, if you guys don't mind me asking? I don't know if you... I don't know if you feature that at all.
I think that the sort of key takeaway, the first thing I would say is before answering like the Afghanistan dimension is to just say about like the Imran Khan situation and vis-a-vis the U.S. position is to like refer to the intercept thing, which is the fact that it is it has been determined, we now know that it is fact, that the American position was to support the Pakistan military establishment's neutralization, not just of Imran Khan, but also his political party. And I think that just sort of, if that is the key and you sort of operate, well, what does Afghanistan represent in that equation? Imran Khan was by no means an opponent of the Taliban and was not somebody who had, he was not a hater of the Taliban. And the Pakistani military establishment were they created the Taliban in essence, but that's not sort of what's in dispute there. I think what's more usefully is in dispute. The Taliban, for what it's worth, like they can make a war with Iran. They can also make peace with Iran. Some of the warlords who are now back in Taliban had actually been hiding out in Iran during the period of the American occupation. So I do think that the sort of like last thing to sort of say there is that Afghanistan is important to the Pakistani military establishment for the purpose of its like long-term strategic antagonism toward India. And Afghanistan is basically West Pakistan. That's how they conceive of it. That's how those Islamist generals conceive of it. And so they will, and Imran Khan, if he is a rival power center that they can't control, just like they took out the Benazir Bhutto, even if she, was also somebody who would support the Taliban when it was, absolutely necessary. We're seeing the same with Khan now.
Yeah, the Pakistanis, in a lot of ways, obviously it was a post-colonial nation, but they adopted a lot of strategies about Afghanistan from the British. And of course, the British, I think John Dolan said, anytime there's a two or more peoples fighting in the world, you can trace it back to the British Empire. In Afghanistan, the British drew a line between Western India and Afghanistan called the Durand Line. That became the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan after partition in the mid-20th century. And the Pakistani military had been trained by the British. They spoke English. The Americans got in there after after World War II was over and said, wow, these guys speak English. They're really professional. They remind us of the Brits. And we basically picked Pakistan from the beginning as our side in this persistent conflict inherited from the 19th century between Afghanistan and the British. The Soviets and the Afghans, despite what happened in the 80s, were quite tight. And so you had the USSR and the Afghans on one end, not Afghan communists either, Afghan, kind of constitutional monarchs and liberals, essentially, who were looking to navigate the Cold War with mostly Soviet assistance, but not antagonizing the West. And then you had America and Pakistan going, yeah, that's cute. We have designs on taking you over in the near future. So you can see that partnership happen way back.
Yeah. I guess the Pakistani military, as far as I understand it at least, has always been like America's influence over Pakistan regardless. So it's not an accident that it seems Imran Khan, despite being popular, and also there are legitimate charges of corruption against him as well, just like any other person that would ever have power in a country like that, was seen as going against the American control over Afghanistan by way of the military.
Yeah, he's been, I think, vocal about China being a better partner. I mean, he's certainly looking toward the future. Tariq Ali wrote that in Kabul, make no mistake, China will be the more influential capital of in a short while. But in Pakistan, it's very messy because you have the ISI using these Islamic movements and these Islamic parties, whether connected to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban or not. The so-called Pakistani Taliban is a real headache because it's fair enough to have a government across the border that is Taliban style. It's a whole other thing when they're in your country. So the ISI used them, but then they had their own chickens coming home to roost. And then you have Imran Khan, who is pro-Taliban, who's been pro-Taliban. Taliban Khan was his nickname, but is not in good stead with the ISI or the deep state of Pakistan. So all these things start to shoot off in their own ways. I mean, it's not all blowback. That's a punchy title for our show. I think we sometimes try to ease up on everyone jumping to that buzzword, actually. But a lot of it is uncontrolled, especially in a country that's trying to do a balancing act that Pakistan is doing.
And I interviewed Anatol Levin, who we have a bonus episode with him, and he's a terrific former journalist, now kind of like resident academic type at Quincy, who wrote a great book about Pakistan called Pakistan, a Hard Country. And he makes the point that, for all of this instability, as it might appear within Pakistan, however, it is actually it's just kind of like I'm paraphrasing him here, but it's a raucous but fundamentally stable system, in part because of just how underdeveloped it is and how puffed up the military is. I mean, Pakistan's a nuclear power. It's incredibly impoverished. It's got, these massive frontier provinces covering huge underdeveloped geographical stretches of territory. Yeah, I mean, it's just simply not a system that can, change the mullahs are not going to be able to, as Anatole argues, and I'm persuaded, they're not going to be able to summon the kind of energy necessary to really overthrow stuff, which is in part, by the way, a major explanation for why the military is able to act, without being circumscribed at all. Why they can just say, all right, Imran Khan, you had a good run, bye-bye now. And your political party and everybody who was ever associated with it is gone.
Yeah.
It's over. Accept your fate.
A friend of mine who's from Pakistan, his dad was a ISI guy. I think he worked with Musharraf at one point. And he's coming into the country in a month, and I'm very curious. It's too late for the show, although I'm sure he wouldn't have spoken on the record anyway. I really want to pick that guy's brain when I get to chat with him. But yeah, we could have done a whole season about Pakistan.
Don't reveal your sources, man. What are you doing?
Oh, he's not a source. I have never met him. I haven't met him yet. And we really try in this season. There's a lot of plates we're spinning, but we try to give enough perspective on Pakistan, India, to a degree Iran, especially in the first half of the season when the revolution's happening there. It's the same time that the hostages are there, the revolution's happening, and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is happening. It's a very, very busy season. So like I said earlier, sometimes you got to trim and you got to cut some stuff out that's really fascinating in and of itself, but that bigger picture is one we're really excited to try and present as this compelling story to everybody.
So ultimately, what's the conclusion here? Did America deserve 9/11? Did the chickens come home to roost or not?
Let's get a clip saying that right before the big PR push. Look, I mean,
you guys just got written up in Variety. You don't want that. You don't want that smoke.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it'll be very clear what the perspective of our show is, because like I said, I don't like to lecture people. I think we kind of did that in season 1 a bit, and I've enjoyed more laying stuff out in a way that of course comes from our point of view, but is sort of letting people take everything for themselves and deciding what all these available facts suggest. What I think is impossible to ignore is the constant presence of compromises due to the connections of America with the Saudis, the Pakistanis, the Israelis, and to a degree the British, the MI6. I mean, this colors everything that happens in the season and what America, whatever it tells us happened, what they are really looking to do as far as damage control and as far as their ambitions in the region. Iran, I think, was always the real enemy, whether we were in Afghanistan or Iraq. You know, there's two countries border that country, and it's not an accident that a lot of people were thinking it was next on the list. So there's a lot of things that you could read into there.
What was the name of the guy who was slated to hand off Osama bin Laden to the United States right before 9/11, who got assassinated by like a rival sect?
There were a couple moments when Osama was about to be handed over, or was being discussed handed over. The Taliban thought about doing it. The Pakistanis thought about doing it, both before and after 9/11. We, interestingly, did not agree to allowing a third-party handoff in a neutral third country. That's what the Taliban and the Pakistanis offered. And
I was Ahmad Shah Massoud. Sorry to cut you off. No, yes, absolutely. Who was assassinated on September 9th, 2001 after CIA agents leaked his coordinates to, I believe, his opposition.
I thought that the ISI had done that, but I guess you're always sort of shadow boxing.
Yeah, I mean, it's splitting hairs.
Yeah. I use, well, the ISI I use as a holdover for the CIA. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's too reductive, but
what's interesting that just as a tidbit there that's really interesting is that Massoud was this hero. We go into his real, the darker aspects of his character in the show, but he was the one lionized and romanticized as like this religious patriot, as opposed to the medieval Taliban or the other Mujahideen warlords. When he was assassinated, which is said to be either a favor that Osama bin Laden did the Taliban because he was anti-Taliban, Massoud was, or it was the ISI who didn't like him. It's really the same motivation. Apparently, according to Steve Cole, whose book Ghost Wars is quite good, not going into everything, but pretty good. Apparently, the Bush administration, the day of his assassination, said, we are going to have a covert war in Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban. A covert war. But a war nonetheless. They were already formulating on September 10th, 2001. They were formulating a policy to take the war plans for Afghanistan off the shelf. So make of that what you will.
Yeah, I mean, that I think pairs along nicely with what you also mentioned, which is that there were numerous instances where the Taliban was negotiating terms of conditional surrender for Osama bin Laden, which the United States promptly responded with, "We don't negotiate with terrorists." Now that famous line, because it felt like the die had been cast many times over. A lot of people think about that when they think about Iraq, but they rarely, I feel like there is this mentality in American consciousness that like Afghanistan was the just invasion, right, for the crimes of 9/11, and I am a firm believer that obviously that was also unjust. I feel as though you guys have a similar opinion on this. I think there's a lot of similarities.
We talk about the idea of the good war versus the criminal war in Iraq, and I think that was something that, to be fair to again, this is my thing. I like to let the stuff speak for itself now, but I think a lot of liberal-minded people thought, look, they sheltered the guy who did 9/11. They probably didn't know about the attempts at negotiation. And you can't do that. So sorry, we're going to invade you. Then once Iraq was in motion, as usual, I think that liberal America and whether they be politicians or media, they need to be backing one side of the new campaign. And in this case, they saw Afghanistan as not only revenge for 9/11, but also a way to seize the Taliban's grotesque medieval regime from them and build schools. The 3 cups of tea philosophy, and we were going to have a thing about Greg Mortensen in the first episode, but I think enough people know about him. He went over there and supposedly built a bunch of schools and had this inspiring memoir, but in fact
he did actually build a bunch of the schools. The thing is that a lot of places they didn't need them, or they immediately fell into disrepair or whatever. And it was just, it's a sort of great, like, it's microcosmic of the, sort of vast development aid suck that,
Yeah.
was our sorry excuse for a 20-year military occupation under the pretense of nation building.
And when Obama is elected, he's very explicit and quite giddy about announcing that the Iraq war is over. Now we can concentrate on the real war, which is Afghanistan. And fair enough, he was correct in pointing out that al-Qaeda existed in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and Iraq had nothing to do with it. That's fair enough. But in fact, the policy that followed was a complete mess, only made Afghanistan more corrupt. The corruption and the warlordism did not go away with Obama. It calcified. No. It was if there is a Vietnam comparison that springs to mind, it's a lot like that. And Craig Whitlock, who's a very good journalist who compiled the Afghanistan Papers, is the name of his book. He details how the Obama administration, perhaps desperate to show a military victory as kind of, liberals who were looking to puff up their chests instead of the cowboys of the Bush administration, they were even more dishonest about the progress in Afghanistan than the Bush administration had been. And at the end of Obama's term, he said, we're ending the war. He did his own mission accomplished moment, in other words, except he didn't even bother to show up to Kabul. It was read by a general or by the commander of NATO forces. That's how kind of like chintzy this whole thing was at that point. And then he didn't even do it. It was left to Trump, who, in fairness, buffoon foreign policy that he had, he did at least do a deal with the Taliban. He kicked something forward. And then Biden did follow through on that as well. Now, what happened afterward is horrific. But as Malalai Joya put it, she's one of the guests on the show. She was the MP that we mentioned who was exiled. Before the withdrawal had happened, I don't know if she feels the same now. She said, we have three enemies in Afghanistan. One is the Taliban. One is the government or the warlords disguised as a government. And one is the U.S. occupation. Take away one of these, please. And what was taken away in August 2021 was the U.S. occupation, and arguably the warlords as well, because most of them fled. They're still left with a horrible enemy in the form of the Taliban. But that is about as involved as America. We've been as involved as we possibly could have, and here we are.
Yeah. Speaking of the Obama administration, there was a brave truth teller that spoke truth to power back then. My favorite military general, Michael Flynn. Just want to give a shout out to him. He's never been wrong, and he continues to be right about both QAnon and also our involvement in Afghanistan with the pedophile warlords being an abject disaster.
I'll sign off then with a message to your listeners and to you about Charlie Flynn, who is one of the unsung heroes of recent history and who figures in our story, who is Mike Flynn's brother, who was also part of like Team McChrystal, and who is like even more, he makes even better decisions than Mike Flynn is how I put it.
The Flynn brothers, they were there with Stan McChrystal. They were part of the McChrystal boys, and it was it's really bizarre.
Now they're our boys. They're America's boys now.
They haven't. They've never given up. They've never surrendered on their mission to speak truth to power, I'd say.
Yeah. We're still living with all these people, in other words. So don't sleep with one eye open,
It's just it is never not funny that he is a cat turd reply guy forever. Like that guy is a cat turd reply guy.
Thank you for your service, Mr. Cat Turd. Your posts are a shining beacon. I saw that. That was awesome.
Yeah,
he literally
it was fucking dope.
It's
so sick that like these are the central figures in like American
he was the head
foreign
of the
policy.
Defense Intelligence Agency.
Yeah. I mean, I knew immediately that he was my ally when he said yes to kidnapping Fethullah Gulen in the worst cooked plan of all time. In a burlap sack, like a fucking cartoon villain.
If Trump gets a second term, Flynn is in the mix for sure, and therefore Cat Turd might be cabinet position.
Cat Turd for Secretary of State.
Absolutely.
Or the press secretary. He'd do a great job with that. Just like just talking, making fart jokes.
I honestly would find that less offensive than Katrina What's-Her-Face, Jean Pierre. Some of watching those press conferences.
Well, not what was the ginger one before? The one before Katrina.
Psaki.
Yeah, Jen Psaki, now host
Psaki,
of Inside.
Now a TV show host. What the hell?
Now a TV show host Inside Jen Psaki. Yeah.
Don't say that.
Brutal.
It's great. No, that's like Davis? I think isn't that literally the name of her show?
Cannot be the name of.
I'm so far removed from wanting to know anything.
Wait, hold on. I'm gonna look this up. I don't want to tell you guys the wrong thing here. Hold on. No fake news here. Oh no, it is Inside Jen Psaki. Yeah, Inside with Jen Psaki.
All right, I'm
I knew
done.
it was gonna be Whit.
Done.
Yeah, there's a
like,
wit there. There's a wit there. But that is her show. Inside Jen Psaki.
No, man, I'm done.
You know,
Okay.
Nicole Wallace. Does Nicole Wallace still have a show on TV? This is where they all go. They all go to MSNBC. Nicole Wallace was the press secretary of Bush, and
Yeah.
I think famously,
we need that. We need the Ari Fleischer hour back.
oh God,
It's-
I miss him.
Yeah.
I don't.
These guys, they all get cushy TV jobs. It's wonderful. It's super cool. I mean, look, one last, I know we keep saying one final thing, but like, I feel like there's a turning point post 9/11 where the protest against wars from the liberal Democratic Party voters is just completely eviscerated. And I don't know if you would say that it's Obama that was more responsible for it, or maybe it was 9/11, but even post 9/11, there was like, there was obviously, sorry, go ahead.
The important thing is that like it's a good question because it touches on something that I wanted to get into that I forgot to bring up earlier, which is that like 9/11 is a whether or not one wants to argue about who knew what when or how it even came together, like the event allows for people who had designs but not the capacity to carry them out to actually carry them out. And this includes long-standing plans that, like the Patriot Act was not something that had just been created out of thin air. It was something that had been on a shelf from the days of the Reagan administration, and you can say that for a lot of different pieces.
Shouts out to Joe Biden.
And I mean, the Predator drone had been in development in the 90s. And, the CIA had this tremendous appetite for an assassinations policy for many, many years, et cetera, et cetera. And what ended up happening, is that ultimately a lot of what they, had really sought and really, had created a lot of scandal in the 70s, they technologically perfected in part because Afghanistan became the target and the quote unquote target rich environment on which they could, get the Predator to work once they figured out how to get it to stop, in the words of James Woolsey, to stop sounding like a lawnmower.
And in the words of Donald Rumsfeld, we clipped this in the show. We're not running out of targets. Afghanistan is. That was his triumphant announcement to the press a couple weeks into the war. But yeah, there's a lot that goes back, and the continuity of government plans were Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney in the 1980s, as well as others. But they were well equipped by 2001 to delve into a pre-existing Cold War program that they would regularly and annually prepare for back during their times in the 1980s. So two of the top positions in the U.S. government were guys who had COG plans, or COG, continuity of government plans.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. Is there anything else you want to plug or anything else you want to cover that we haven't gotten into? I feel like if we talk more, you're going to spoil the whole fucking season.
Yeah, we've teased a lot. I mean, I don't think any of this really teases or spoils too much because it's there's so much and like the kind of bit by bit, cookie crumbs that get us from one place to another in the show. But I would just say you can go sign up now at blowback.show and just click the big button that says subscribe. You just pop in your payment information. It's $25 for the whole season, 10 bonus episodes, merch discounts will be coming. We're doing t-shirts this year. For the first time, people have been on our ass about merch. We're finally doing merch. Extra music. We've got a lot of goodies for people, and do it before Friday, but definitely do it after Friday because that's when the season drops.
Hell yeah. All right. Thank you so much for coming on, guys.
Thank you, Hasan.
Thank you for having us.
Good first time for me.
Pleasure to be here.
I've talked about this with respect to Travis Scott before. It's such a weird thing to talk about, but I do love when you can tell when someone has like a genuine love for like all aspects of creation, where Brendan himself has done a lot of the composing for the music as well, like or for the podcast as well. It's like very well put together.